All right. Hi, guys. We're about to put the kids to bed, so you're going to hear them walking around, I think. But, all right. At some point, someone let me know in the chat box if you can hear. That would be great. No. Hola, Alejandro. I'm on camera. Good night. Love you. All right. So this time, so far, no one has texted me any questions. So camera's on. Yep. I just kissed her goodnight.
Okay.
So I'll wait on those. But in the meantime, tomorrow is paper 3. I will be there to let you in. The tunnel doors next to the cafeteria. Don't walk through the cafeteria. Don't walk through summer school. Don't do that. But I will be there at 7 a.m. to let you in if you wanted to come into my room for a half hour. And then I will bring those people over to Miss Tamayo in the media center. I want to remind you that my new room, I have no cell service. So if you're late, I can't get text messages from you letting you know that, letting me know that you're there or whatnot. I can't hear from you. The other thing I want to remind you of is paper 3 is still 30 multiple choice questions, just like the last time. Scantron looks exactly the same as the last time, except tomorrow's test is an hour and 15 minutes. So it'll start at 8 and it'll end at 9:15 instead of at 9. The questions come from chapter 6 through 10. So you need to look at the back half of the textbook, and the stuff is going to be about the same percentage of questions from each chapter. So 5 to 7 questions per chapter. Okay. That's all the basic information. After that, I'm waiting for questions. Chapter overviews. Well, Alejandro, you can read the chapters. Is that asking too much? Okay. So if you are going to go chapter by chapter, I'm going to start looking at chapter 6. Chapter 6 is the general overview for macro. The main points in chapter 6 are on efficiency. There's productive efficiency and allocative efficiency. Productive efficiency is when you're producing at the lowest possible cost. So P equals the minimum point on the ATC curve, which is equal to the MC. So P equals MC equals ATC. That would be productively efficient, producing at the lowest cost. Allocative efficiency is when you're giving the people what they want. Supply equals demand, or you're at equilibrium. Or also where demand equals your MC, where D equals MC equals P, because in a graph for a firm, the MC curve is the same as your supply curve. All right, so those are your 2 main types of efficiency that you need to know from chapter 6. Pareto, you'll probably get 1 question on Pareto, and the Pareto optimality just says that you can't make someone else better off without making someone else worse off, because you've maximized the production in your firm or in your economy. So if you're at Pareto, the only way to make somebody better is to make somebody worse. So it means you're producing at the maximum. Madison, I'll get to the 4 market structures. So there's the different efficiencies in Chapter 6, and the other part of Chapter 6 is the market failures. And there are different types of market failures. The market failures that we focused on are monopoly power causing deadweight loss. So when a monopoly has power, they don't produce where supply equals demand. They don't produce where surpluses are maximized. Instead, they produce where MR equals MC, and they charge a higher price. So they have minimized the consumer surplus and expanded the producer surplus and created what is called deadweight loss. And that is that little triangle inside the graph. And that deadweight loss is a type of market failure as a result of monopoly power. The other market failures we looked at were externalities, positive and negative externalities, and those are the side effects, the economic side effects of the market not being efficient. So negative externalities, pollution, and positive externalities like landscaping or parks or schools, things like that. So we had those. Then we also have merit and demerit goods as a type of market failure. The market won't produce merit goods, and not enough of them anyway, so the government has to step in. The market overproduces demerit goods, so again, the government has to step in. And what are the other ones on the list we're looking at here? Information failure and adverse selection or moral hazard. Those only usually come up as definitions. They don't come up as application questions usually. But information failure is when one person has more information or doesn't have enough information to make the best possible choice. Moral hazard is making decisions that aren't necessarily in your best interest. And so those definitions you'll want to look at. So I talked about externalities. Cost benefit analysis is just looking at the private cost and the PC versus the social cost, SC. And what does it cost privately versus what does it cost to society? And the external cost is the difference between the two. So that's how you conduct the cost benefit analysis. And that is all of Chapter 6. Very quickly. Chapter 7 is where we get into the market structures and the cost curves and utility curves. Utility is the measurement of satisfaction or happiness, and that utility is what creates our demand curve. So each additional unit you consume gives you less and less satisfaction or less and less utility. And that is why the demand curve is downward sloping, because you're not going to continue to pay for a product that gives you less and less satisfaction. Back on the very first day of school or second day of school, I told you a story about pizza. And you go out to lunch with your friends and you order a pizza. And when it finally comes, you're so excited. And immediately you look for the best slice and you take the first bite and it is phenomenal. And then you take another bite and it's good. And then you take another bite and it's okay. And as you continue to consume slice after slice of pizza, your utility or your satisfaction goes down. So that means that you are decreasing in your satisfaction from consuming that product. That's the law of demand, right? Or it's a diminishing marginal utility. And that is why the demand curve is downward sloping. Now, remember, utility and, well, any numbers or chart they give you, they'll usually give you a total benefit or total utility. But what we really want to concentrate on is marginal. Remember, economic thinking is marginal thinking. It's comparing the added or additional benefit of the last unit consumed, because that's where we can really compare details, right? We don't want to know how total utility or how overall happiness is, but the last unit, how happy did that make you? And was that the best use of that resource? Because remember, resources are scarce and we have to make the best decision possible. So we think at the margin. So you always have to figure out the marginal utility, and that's the change in total utility. So we look at the change to make sure we're conducting our utility. I just totally blanked, that we're conducting our utility analysis correctly. The other equation that is in here that comes up is marginal utility per dollar, making sure we're making the best use of our budget possible. And that is when you take the marginal utility, remember change in, marginal means change in, marginal utility of the good divided by the price of that good. And making sure that the marginal utility for good X divided by the price of good X is equal to the marginal utility of good Y divided by the price of good Y, so that we're budgeting appropriately and we're making the best use of our money possible. That's the goal. Best possible use of our budget. Okay, then we go into budget lines and indifference curves. Now, a budget line, you guys, this is super simple, is a budget line is the production possibilities curve for a person. Okay, so the PPC curve is for the whole country, and the budget line is for a person. You can buy good A or you can buy good B. You have $20. You can spend $20 on A and $0 on B, or you can spend $20 on B and $0 on A, and any combination therein. That is your budget line. Okay, they're not that complicated. Indifference curves are where people get tripped up. And the indifference curve is the measurement of your utility or your happiness consuming these two goods. And you would be equally happy at any point on the indifference curve. However, you're only able to purchase where the indifference curve intersects your budget line, because that's how much money you have. So that's what you have to focus on, is those intersection points and how your budget changes and how your indifference curves change. Okay, you guys are asking questions, and he asked me to go chapter by chapter. So we will get to economies of scale in a moment, and I will talk about monopolistic competition and perfect comp in a moment. Patrick, how do you find marginal utility? Marginal utility is the change in total utility divided by the change in quantity. And usually the change in quantity is 1. So if you have 1 unit and your total utility is 20, your marginal utility would be 20 minus 0 divided by 1. Okay, because before, when you had 0 units, you had 0. Now you have 1 unit and you're at 20. Okay, so your marginal utility would be 20. Then for your second unit, if you went from 20 happiness when you consumed the second unit, you went to 15 happiness. So 20 minus 15 is 5. That's the change. Divided by, then you have 2 units minus 1 unit. So 1. So 5 over 1 is 5. So your marginal utility is like that. So here, I'm going to hold up the textbook for a minute. This is my book. And you can see I found the marginal utility. I hope you can see it. So in the textbook here, there was the quantity and the total utility. And then I found marginal. So we went from 0 to 20, so our marginal was 20. Then we went from 20 to 35, so our marginal was 15. Then we went from 35 to 45, so our marginal was 10. And then we went from 45 to 53, so it's 8. 53 to 58, 5. It's just the change. Okay? Patrick, let me know if that answered your question or not. And then if not, I'll find a different example, but I might have to go to the other room. Okay. Okay, so the utility curves is how we find demand. Utility is how we find demand. The next type of curves in the book is our cost curves. And there's tons of different cost curves. Actually, there's 7 that we learned. And the 7 different cost curves are all for different things. The total cost curve. And total cost curve is made up of 2 different costs, the fixed and the variable. So you have total fixed and total variable added together equal total cost. We also found our average cost curves. Average total cost is our total cost divided by our quantity. Our average fixed cost is our fixed cost divided by our quantity. Average variable cost is our variable cost divided by our quantity. So to find the averages, you just find your totals divided by your quantity. The 7th one that we learned is the marginal cost curve, and that's the most important one, your MC curve. Your marginal cost curve is going to be the change in. Okay, remember marginal means change in. So your marginal cost is the additional cost incurred from producing the additional unit, right? Marginal means additional. So when you added that last unit, how much did your cost go up? Now, the reason MC is important is a lot of things, but the first reason is because MR equals MC, where your marginal revenue equals your marginal cost, is your profit maximization production quantity. So remember, MR equals MC. It's tattooed right there across your forehead. And where MR equals MC is where you want to produce. Now, that point, where MR equals MC is also going to determine your price if you're perfectly competitive. But we'll talk about that in a moment. The marginal cost curve is also important because it is the mirror image of your productivity curve. Okay, so when marginal cost is at its minimum point on the Nike swoosh, because remember it looks like a Nike swoosh. So when marginal cost is at its minimum of that Nike swoosh is where productivity is at its maximum. So your production point peak is where MC is at its minimum. Additionally, your marginal cost curve crosses your ATC curve and your AVC curve at their minimum points. So minimum point of variable cost and the minimum point of total cost are going to be the intersection points of the marginal cost curve. The beauty in the test tomorrow is that it's multiple choice. You don't have to graph any of this. You just have to know what it looks like. You have to remember what the graphs look like. In your textbook, let me find out what page this is on. 152 of the book, if you're looking at the book, 152. Okay. Can we see a picture of them? Yes. Give me a second. Okay. My book is very highlighted, so. All right. So there's your total variable, and total fixed. Now remember, total fixed is fixed, so it doesn't change. It's always the same. That's why it's vertical, horizontal line. Now here's your marginal. You have ATC at the top, then you have AVC, and then you have AFC. And you have your marginal cost curves, that Nike swoosh that goes through them. Okay? So there's your cost curves. Oh, right. Now the marginal cost curve, other reason it is important besides all the ones I already mentioned, the marginal cost curve above the AVC curve, I had to look at the graph to remember what I'm talking about. The marginal cost curve above the AVC curve is equal to the supply curve. That's where you find your supply curve from the intersection of AVC and MC, and you follow the MC curve up, and that's your supply curve. Okay. Next is the next thing I talked about is the long run and economies of scale. Okay. Economies of scale are experienced when you grow the size of your company, but you lower your costs. So by making more products, you're doing so cheaper. I want you to think about this as a consumer, not a producer, but as a consumer, people experience economies of scale when they shop at places like Costco. I buy 800 rolls of paper towels because it's cheaper per roll than buying 3 rolls of paper towels at Publix, which is probably much more, space efficient, but not cost effective. So economies of scale for a company are when they make more product, but actually lower their costs. So if I have a car production factory and I build this whole factory and I get all the equipment and I make one car, obviously that's a very expensive car because I'm paying for all the machinery and labor and space and whatnot for a huge factory. So producing one car doesn't make sense. I need to increase the quantity of cars that I produce in order to experience economies of scale. And every additional car I make would decrease the cost of production because those costs are divided amongst multiple units instead of just 1 or 2 units. So then the next thing is constant returns to scale. So I have economies of scale where my costs are dropping, okay? And then I get to a point of constant returns to scale. And that's where my long run ATC curve would be flat, okay? That means that making more isn't changing my costs. And then you finally get to a point where you experience diseconomies of scale, and that means your costs are going up as you make more. So making more products is actually getting more expensive. So I hope that answers the economies of scale question that somebody asked earlier. Okay. All right. So now we get to the 4 market structures. You need to know the characteristics of the 4 market structures and what their graphs look like. because they will give you a graph and ask you which market structure it is. That is one of the easiest things to answer. So easy, okay? The first market structure we learned is perfect competition. And perfect competition is when everything is the same. You have a large number of buyers and sellers selling an identical product at a price that is set by the market. Perfect comp are price takers. They do not get a say in what their business is doing. They have to do what the market dictates because there's too much competition. If you don't do what I want as the consumers will go somewhere else. Yes, Madison. That is why it is Mr. Darp. Because for this firm, their price is set by the market at market equilibrium. So their price is set and their demand is set. They can sell as many as they want to at that price. But if they try and raise the price, they will sell none. And if they try and lower the price, they're going to actually end up losing profit because they could sell it for more and they're not. So for a perfectly competitive firm, you have Mr. Darp. He's a horizontal line where MR equals D equals AR equals P. Okay. And then you have your Nike swoosh MC curve and profit maximization you produce where MR equals MC. That's what you do. Okay. So that would be a perfectly competitive firm's characteristics and graph. The thing that gets asked about perfect comp is if they should shut down or not. Are they earning a profit or are they earning a loss or are they at LRE? I made you guys graph this a bunch of times. I hope you remember something. But when you have Mr. Darp right here, you have your ATC and AVC curves, okay? If your ATC curve is beneath Mr. Darp, price is here and your costs are down here, you're making money, right? If price is higher than cost, you have a profit. If you have Mr. Darp and your price is touching Mr. Darp, remember where MR equals D equals AR equals P equals ATC, we are at LRE, okay? LRE is where everything is equal. Long run equilibrium, everything is equal. If you have Mr. Darp and your ATC is above, you're losing money. But do you shut down? Well, that depends on your average variable cost curve. If your AVC curve is beneath Mr. Darp, you keep running. But if your variable costs are above Mr. Darp, you shut down. That's what you do. Okay. So that was profit, equilibrium, loss, shutdown. And those are the 4 conditions. I'm pretty sure those are all 4 you need to know. I don't think you need to know other ones. Okay. Okay. Yes, Madison. If both ATC and a VC are above Mr. Darp, you shut down. Yes. All right. Now I'm trying to see about, that's that graph, that graph, that graph. The next market structure we learned was the opposite of perfect comp, and that's a monopoly. A monopoly is a market with one firm that controls the industry. Because there is only one firm producing this product, there is a single seller. They are a price maker. They sell at whatever price they want. Now, monopolies will not necessarily sell at the highest possible price. That's a misconception. Instead, they want to sell at the price where MR equals MC. And then they go up to the demand curve. And they do that because they can sell it for higher. So why would you settle for a low price when you could sell it for higher? Now, because a monopoly faces a downward sloping demand curve, their MR curve is beneath D. They are not equal. Okay. So in a monopoly, Mr. Darp does not exist. We have MR beneath D. But single seller, high barriers to entry, and these can be legal barriers or natural barriers. If they own the only oil field, then they're going to have a natural monopoly on oil. If they get a patent for their medication, then they're going to be the only producer of that prescription medication or something like that. So monopolies exist for lots of different reasons. And yes, they sell at high prices because there's no substitutes. People have to buy from them. So when you don't have any other options, they're able to sell at a high price. So that's a monopoly. The next one was monopolistic competition. Monopolistic competition is tricky because the graph looks exactly like a monopoly. Exactly like a monopoly. Okay. The only way you're going to know it's monopolistic competition is if in the question they tell you it's competitive. Okay. Patrick, that is not correct. I'm going to correct that in 1 second, but I'm going to draw you a graph real quick. Let me get a colored marker so you can see it better. Okay, so for a monopolistically competitive firm, the way that we know it is monopolistic competition and not a monopoly is if they tell you in the question that this firm is competitive, then you know it's monopolistic comp and not monopoly. Or, okay, we have our price, we have our quantity, we have D, we have MR, and we have MC. Okay, so this is what a monopoly would look like. Okay, I hope you can see it. I can't see if you can see it or not. All right, now in a monopolistically competitive market, in the long run, because there is a long run, my pen just broke. So weird. Okay, we're going to produce at the quantity where MR equals MC. And we're going to take our price up to the demand curve because why not sell high? Okay, so here we go on there. Hopefully you can see MR equals MC and I raised my price up high. That's what a monopoly would do. In a monopolistically competitive market, you know, like the market for jeans, there's a ton of companies that make jeans, but they're all a little bit different. So somebody put some holes in the jeans or something. What happens is because there's a substitute product, demand can shift to the left, MR would shift to the left because they move in conjunction. So in a monopolistically competitive market, there is a long run equilibrium. In a monopoly, there's not. A monopoly is going to look like this forever. They have no competition. But because monopolistic comp has competition, their ATC curve is going to look like this at LRE. Okay. So you can see at LRE, they're breaking even because where demand and price intersect, their total revenue is equal to their total cost. Okay. So that would be monopolistic competition because they can hit that point. A monopoly would never hit that point. A monopoly would have their total cost curve down here and they'd be making a profit because they can. So that is the difference between their graphs. All right. So, okay, they were supposed to, so they do not produce at MR equal. Yes, Patrick, they do produce at MR equals MC. Everybody produces at MR equals MC. That's where our profit maximization production quantity is located, always. What they don't do is they don't charge the price at MR equals MC. So the price at MR equals MC is way down here. But why would I charge way down here if people are willing and able? Remember, that's the definition of demand. Willing and able to pay up here. If they're going to pay this much, then as an astute business owner, I'm going to charge them the higher price. Because if they're willing and able to pay it, makes no sense for me to not charge that price. Okay? So monopoly, monopolistic comp. The last graph is the oligopoly, or the last market structure. And an oligopoly is a market that's dominated by 4 or fewer firms. 4 or fewer firms control majority share of that market. They have the market power, that price making decisions. Now, examples of that in this day and age are like soft drinks and cereal. Those are oligopolies. You have high barriers to entry. You cannot just compete with these companies tomorrow because the costs are too high. Now, few firms, some control over the price. The high barriers to entry, there's incentive to collude, and that's to cheat the system, because if an oligopoly is colluding, they can act like a monopoly. They can control and set that high price because there's not that competition. The graph for an oligopoly is the kinky graph. And the reason it's kinky is because it actually has 2 different demand curves connected. So you start with a very elastic demand curve, and then you pick up on a very inelastic. Okay, so here we go. And then your MR curve goes the same way. All right, MR, and then here's our D. So I'm trying to draw this. Give me a second because my line is not very nice. Okay, so ignore this one. That's crap. Okay, so I have an elastic demand curve up here at the top, and then I have an inelastic demand curve. So it looks like this. And then so my MR curve is going to be here, and then it drops down, and then it goes here again. Okay, so there is my oligopoly. So it has this kink in it. And the trick to an oligopoly is that stupid pen, they don't care about their MC as long as it's along the kink. If MC is along the kink, their quantity will always stay the same. MR equals MC is at the kink, they're going to produce that amount. Their quantity stays the same. The only thing that changes is their profits. Okay. The other part of oligopolies, you could get a question on game theory. And we did 2 days on game theory. We did all those games and the M&Ms and splitter steel. You have to make sure you know how to read the matrix, right? The person on the left is the number on the left, and the person on the top is the number on the right, and comparing what they're going to do. Okay. So that was game theory. Okay. I talked about a monopoly. Okay. Large and small firms. Cartel. Cartels are illegal. Objectives of a firm. Okay, so some firms, profit maximization is the primary objective, MR equals FC. Some people want to maximize total revenue. And if you're going to produce where total revenue is maximized, you're producing where MR equals 0, because that's the peak of your total revenue curve, is revenue maximization. On page 180 and 181, there's some other objectives of firms if they want to do other things that are not profit or maximization or sales maximization, if they want to appease their board or have high stock values and stuff like that. So you can read on those. And that is it for chapter 7. All right. I think I've answered all the questions so far on those chapters. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then chapter 8, government intervention. I believe this is taxation and subsidies, but you guys pretty much know that. That's shifting the supply and demand curves. A subsidy is a shift to the right, taxation is a shift to the left, and how we correct those externalities when we have them in order to benefit society and benefit everyone. And then also in here is income redistribution, and we talked about that as well. We talked about the Lorenz curve and the Gini coefficient. Remember, the Lorenz, the fatter it is, the more unequal, and the more narrow it is, the more equal the country. And the Gini coefficient, the closer to 0, the more equal, the closer to 1, the more unequal. So unequal countries have a high Gini, equal countries have a low Gini, and that's that. Vertical integration. Vertical integration is when you're buying up the products that go in or out of your company. So for example, if like Pepsi bought an aluminum factory and then they bought some sugarcane fields out in Belgrade, and now they own the sugar and they own the aluminum and they own the recipe, and they just do all the things themselves. They're moving up or down the line. Okay. Horizontal integration is when you buy up the people on the same level as you, the same level as you. So for horizontal integration, like Disney bought ABC and ESPN and Pixar and Marvel, and they're buying up all these entities to integrate into their umbrella. Okay, so horizontal is when you're going this way. Vertical is when a company is going up and down. Okay, if a bank is merging with another bank, that's horizontal. They're a bank, they're coming together. If a bank is buying up an insurance company, bank, insurance company, vertical. Okay, so that you just have to look at what product they're producing and selling to determine that. And then there's more explanations of those on, I just saw that page a few minutes ago. Where'd it go? That's backwards, hold on. Here we go. It's 176. Page 176 has a cute little graphic of lateral, horizontal, and vertical merges. So you can kind of see there's that. Okay. All right. Redistribute wealth, tax people, move people. Okay. So the other part of this chapter, the other big part is the wage rates, wage rate determination. And wage rate determination is done on the factor market side instead of the product market side of the graphs. So monopolies, perfect comp, monopolistic comp, and oligopolies, and all their graphs for the MR and MC and whatnot, that all happened in the product market. Wage rates are determined in the factor market, and that's because there's derived demand for labor, which means that a company only needs the labor if people demand their products. So they derive their demand for workers from people demanding their products. And if people don't demand their products, they don't need any workers. So that is the derived demand for labor. That demand curve for labor will determine the wage rates. Okay. And there is the graphs for wage rates on 209, page 209 and 210. And that's going to go through how we determine the wage rates in the market. Okay. So you can look at the graphs. The graphs are similar to the product market graphs, but they're just backwards because remember, the worker, the individual, is now the supplier. Okay. I would be the supplier of the labor, and the school district is the buyer of the labor. So they are the demand, and I am the supply. So that's the thing to keep in mind when you're looking at those wage rate graphs. Okay. Now chapters 9 and 10. Oh my gosh, we're almost to the end, and I feel like I've been doing this forever. Okay, this is going to end up being longer than your exam tomorrow. That's crazy. All right. Macroeconomy. So chapter 9 brings us back to tigers. Okay, but now we're looking at all the goals. Now we TIGERS. Okay, so balance of trade was in paper 1, but it will come up again. Not necessarily the current account, capital account, not necessarily the nitty gritty details, but trade will come up. Inflation will come up. Then we have growth in GDP that will come up, and employment numbers and unemployment will come up. The types of unemployment. Redistribution of income, I just talked about that a moment ago. That was in chapter 8 through taxes and how we achieve equity, Lorenz curve and Gini's, and then stability of the economy, the economic stabilizers. So what we're focusing on chapter 9 is tigers and making sure we know all the goals of the macroeconomy and how each one is influenced. Okay, so here we have in this chapter, we're starting off on economic growth, but the key to economic growth is understanding that sustainability needs to be stressed, because if we just push growth and it's not sustainable, eventually we'll collapse. Now we need to know the formula for economic growth is expanding our GDP, C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Okay, that's how we measure it and change it. Now, one of the things I want you to know is actual versus potential growth, and the graphs for that are on 220. Remember, actual growth is anything from inside the production possibilities curve up to the curve that we're on. That's actual growth. We can actually do that right now. Potential growth is what we could do in the future if we expand our factors of production technology, right? That's how we push our PPC curve outward. Is I in GDP consumer investment or government investments? It's neither. It's business investment. Business investment. I is business spending. C is consumer spending, and G is government spending. So I is business investments, but it also includes, because it's really weird like this, consumer purchases of property and real estate. So I is business investment in inventories and whatnot, as well as, okay, business investment in inventory and in capital equipment, as well as purchases of real estate by consumers. So real estate is considered investment as well. So that's in the I instead of the C, but that's where we put it for that reason. Government investments, the government really doesn't have a whole lot of investments. They just spend money. They're not really making all that much money. So there's that. Okay. So your actual and potential graphs. They also introduce in this chapter, remember your LRAS curves and potential growth for those versus actual growth. Okay, so those are right there on page 220. Okay, the next one is, factors that contribute to economic growth, increasing the quantity or quality of your factors of production. I mean, you should know that. And then the cost of benefits. Okay, so there's there, and then we get to the income statistics, output measure, C plus I plus G plus X minus M. The input method is C as work, wages plus interest plus rent plus profits. So the income method to calculating GDP is looking at the money going in to the households. The expenditure approach is looking at the money going out. So C plus I plus G plus X minus N. So they're just the two different methods of consuming, calculating it. This is comparing countries, comparing GDP per capita. Remember, per capita is the most accurate comparison because then you're looking not just at how large an economy is, but how profitable it is based on the population it has. And then comparing for standard of living. Remember, the HDI, the Human Development Index, is very important, and more important than calculating GDP if we're looking for actual statistics where we're looking at the quality or the standard of living of the people, because GDP does not tell you that, is to look up GNI, gross national income, because that's actually going to take into account more of the things that impact the people in their daily lives than GDP. Because GDP doesn't tell you about the standard of living of the people in the country. It just tells you how productive a country is. So countries in the Middle East can have really high GDP, but there's women in those countries who have no rights. So it doesn't tell you about that. It just tells you that the country is wealthy. All right. There's going to be a question on the test if you're getting nitty gritty, comparing a few different curves, because they always throw an oddball curve out there to see, who's really paying attention. And one of the ones they put on there is the Kuznets curve, and they'll put Phillips, and then they'll put, give me a second to find them because they're all the ones at the very back of the book. They throw them all in there. Laffer curve, Kuznets curve, Phillips curve, those are always on there. They'll give it to you and they'll ask you which one it is to see if you know. Phillips curve is on page 267. Laffer curve, I just saw that was on page 271. And Kuznets, I'm on page 231 with that one. And Lorenz, they'll put those four and they'll see if you know what they are. Most people don't because you didn't read the book. But if you did, you would see that they are measuring different things. Lorenz obviously is income inequality. Kuznets is looking at GDP changes and the Gini coefficient changes. So it's also related to income inequality, but it's compared to the GDP of the country. Lorenz is looking at income distribution for a country. So there's those two. Okay. Characteristics of economies. You guys know those. So you should be able to tell me about developing, and less developed countries and their characteristics, what makes them so. I'm going to go on because I don't need to get into that. Unemployment, and I forgot the Laffer curve. The Laffer curve, I forgot to explain it. Oh, because I wasn't there yet. That's in chapter 10. That's why I didn't, but I can if you want me to here. All right. So the Phillips curve is unemployment. It's measuring inflation versus unemployment. And the Laffer curve is taxation. And it says you can raise taxes to a point and people are still incentivized to work. And then you raise taxes too high and it's now a disincentive to work. So people quit working and then your tax revenue will actually fall because you raise taxes too high. Does that make sense? So that's the Laffer curve. So Laffer is taxes. So you can laugh at taxes. Phillips is unemployment and inflation. And Kuznets and Lorenz are on income inequality. Okay. So I'll go back to that one if you need me to. But for now, I'm going to go to unemployment. For those of you looking at the book, I'm on page 241. The unemployment, the three main types they focus on in ACE are cyclical, structural, and frictional. Frictional are people who quit their jobs because they want to find a new job, or they hate their boss, or they just graduated from school and they're looking for a job. That's frictionally unemployed. Structural unemployment means they lack the skills they need for the jobs that are available. So your people aren't trained for the jobs that we need filled. And that's something that's happening somewhat in the US right now. We need people with degrees in plumbing, and we need electricians, we need welders, and there's not people going into these career paths. So we will have structural unemployment because there's not enough workers to meet the demand for those jobs. The last one is cyclical unemployment, and the cyclical unemployment is the unemployment that follows the business cycle. So as we are experiencing economic expansion, our economic booms, cyclical unemployment goes down. And then once our economy starts to decrease and we have a contraction in the economy, or if we experience a recession, the cyclical unemployment goes up. So cyclical unemployment moves opposite of the business cycle. That's why it's called cyclical. The ideal unemployment rate for a country is between 4 and 6%. That's the goal. If our unemployment rate is between 4 and 6%, we're doing great. Below 4 is worrisome because that means people are working that don't want to work. People who don't want to be in the labor force are holding jobs. So there's that. Higher than 6 is when we start to worry because people who want jobs can't get them. So there's that. All right. Okay. There we go. And now income and the multiplier. Okay. The multiplier is what tells us how quickly money is going to grow the economy. Remember that if we hold our reserve ratio in a bank really low, the bank only has to keep a little bit of cash in their vault. They're lending out more money. That money is going through the economy and growing and growing and growing. Now, if that multiplier is high, they have to keep a lot of money in their vaults, then the amount of money going out into the economy is lower. So we're not going to grow as much. And when we did this activity, I put it on the board and you guys could click the button to grow the money supply in the economy. You could grow the money multiplier. All right. Now, here's C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Again, graphs of it. Again. All right. Okay. Keynesian and monetarist approaches to, I gave you those music videos that you never watched about the battle of the century in Keynes versus Hayek and their opinions on macroeconomic policy. And Keynesian economists like government spending, and they think government spending is the key to growing the economy and also the key to fixing recessions. If the government throws money at the problem, it'll grow the economy. Hayek and the Austrian school argue that that's not the best approach. So that we don't want to just throw more money because what we're doing is causing inflation and not actually fixing the problems. And we're not letting the free market rule. So that's the two approaches to this. Is it related to monetary policy, the money multiplier? Yes, somewhat. The reserve ratio is one of the things that the Federal Reserve controls. They can adjust that reserve ratio as a part of monetary policy. Yeah, and that is on page 254 and 255. Okay. All right. In your book, they called it a liquidity ratio because it's a British book. In American economics, we call it a reserve rate. But it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Okay. All right. I'm almost done here, you guys. That's awesome. Okay, the next thing that we're going into is types of foreign aid and ways we funnel money into foreign countries. And we can do it through investing in their country, investing in their infrastructure, or just giving money as well. That's detailed there. And then moving on, chapter 10. Oh, chapter 10 is the easy one because it's just comparing tigers. Like if you have a lot of trade, then it's going to influence your inflation rates, right? And if unemployment is low, inflation will be high. And if unemployment is high, inflation will be low. Because if people don't have jobs, they're not spending money. So how do all these things balance out? That is what is in chapter 10. The different goals working together and against each other, and why there's this paradox and conflict between policies. So that is it. That's chapter 10. That was 51 minutes, you guys. That's a long time. I feel like I've been talking for a long time. So are there any questions per se? Oh, I don't think anyone's texted me any. I didn't look at my phone though. I don't know where my phone is. I'm going to go with no. Maybe I lost my phone. I don't know if someone's texted me. I'm going to go with no. That seems like the good answer. Okay, inflation goes up or down based on the aggregate demand curve moving. Okay. Oh, sorry, I'm really tired. It's 10 p.m. It's like my bedtime. Okay, so when aggregate demand increases, inflation is going to go up. Okay, if aggregate demand is going down, we'll have deflation. And that's because inflation is a change in the price level of the economy. That's the definition. So here on our graph, we have price level, we have real GDP, we have aggregate demand, and aggregate supply. All right. So there's the prices in the economy. If aggregate demand changes, now we have inflation. Prices went up. All right. Aggregate demand went up. Aggregate demand is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus N. So aggregate demand went up because something happened with C or I or G or X minus N. If aggregate demand goes down, that's deflation. And that would happen if any of the policies that would cause contractionary or recessionary policy for fiscal or monetary policy. Price level inflation can also happen as a result of aggregate supply decreasing in an economy. So if our aggregate supply decreases and that shifts to the left, we're going to have an increase in prices as well. So that's how that works. All right. I see that I'm losing people as we go here because it's late now. It's really late. I haven't heard from Alejandro in a while. Alejandro, are you still there? No comment tells me no. All right. Since there's no more questions coming in and no one's texting any, I'm going to go ahead and say goodnight and set your alarms, guys. And I will see you tomorrow morning. If you're coming to my room, be at the doors at 7. Okay? All right. Good night.